Well, here we are. It must be Wednesday, and we're starting 6 minutes late. My apologies for that. It's a snowy Wednesday in southern Ontario, but here we are. We're live. Today, I want to talk about human trafficking. You know that for the last 6 years, my work has been almost entirely focused on trauma. Women suffering in silence, frontline workers overwhelmed, communities trying to help but running out of tools. And then every so often, an article comes out along that forces us to confront the truth we keep trying to look away from. Recently, an article published in a newspaper, I saw it in Sudbury.com, published a closer look at human trafficking in Canada. And their conclusion was blunt. Human trafficking is far worse than the statistics show. Not slightly worse, not marginally underreported, but catastrophically underestimated. And because the problem is underestimated, the impact is underestimated. And I'm talking about the impact on survivors, on families, on agencies, on our economy, on our public health system. Today, I want to talk about three things. First, I want to talk about why trafficking numbers are so inaccurate. Second, I want to talk about what that means for survivors and the agencies trying to help. And third, I want to talk about how the Inspyrd Angels pilot study may point to a scalable, neuroscience-based way forward in helping people who have been traumatized. Now, the study was completed last winter and it was released at the beginning of December this year. So let's start with the numbers. Canada reports roughly 4,000 cases of human trafficking between 2012 and 2022. That's 10 years. But here's the truth. For every victim recorded, there are dozens who never enter the system. And that's got to make you wonder why. Certainly makes me wonder why. Survivors don't report because police cases don't reflect lived reality, because exploitation is relational. 91% of victims knew their trafficker, because Indigenous women represent only 4% of Canada's population, but 50% of those trafficked. And because trafficking is a word we reserve for dramatic stories, instead of recognizing where it actually lives. It lives in small towns. It lives in hotels next to highways. It lives in private residences. It lives in relationships. In communities where we assume that it doesn't happen here. Trafficking is not rare. Awareness is rare. And this leads to the most dangerous misconception of all. The most dangerous. If the numbers look small, maybe the impact's small. Maybe we don't have to allocate resources to it. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. There is this massive hidden impact of trafficking. When human trafficking is underestimated, everything downstream becomes underestimated. The first thing I'll talk about is what I call the trauma load. Trafficking is not a single event. It is absolutely years of coercion. It's years of threats. It's years of sexual exploitation. It's years of sleep deprivation, which I'll talk about in another session. It is years of chronic stress. It is years of relational betrayal. And it produces complex PTSD, which results in nervous system dysregulation and a collapse of the self-belief and future orientation. Many survivors live in a state of hypervigilance or shutdown long after leaving exploitation. The cost is enormous, emotional and neurological. There's a huge burden on support agencies. Survivor-led agencies like Rising Angels carry a weight almost nobody talks about. These organizations operate with limited funding, which they raise themselves, high demand, staff and volunteers who themselves are often survivors and who haven't had a ton of training, to be fair. They have an endless stream of crisis, and they are the ones answering the phone at 2 a.m. They're the ones sitting with women while they detox, dissociate, or destabilize. They hold the stories that echo their own. That burden alone is incredible. And here's what the agencies consistently tell me. We need more effective tools. We need trauma support that works for survivors who cannot tolerate retelling their story. Traditional clinical models, exposure therapy, talk therapy, long-term psychotherapy, often fail for trafficking survivors. Not because the survivors don't want to heal, but because retelling the story is a trigger. This is neuroscience. So we need tools that reduce trauma without re-traumatizing. And the third thing is there's a massive community and economic impact. Underestimating trafficking means we underestimate the policing costs going into it, the strain on the healthcare system, the years of lost education these people endure, the lost employment, the potential to pass the trauma down intergenerationally, the impact on destabilizing a community, burnout among frontline workers who hear these stories day in and day out. And every uncounted survivor represents a story. It represents a family. They represent a lifetime altered. And every survivor and everybody who's currently traumatized represents a community that's stretched beyond its capacity. So that's the bad news. The good news is we're in an incredible place and time in neuroscientific history. And here's where the story pivots. And I'll share my personal experience. In 2025, we partnered with Rising Angels Awareness and Restorative Care, a survivor-led Canadian charity, to test neuroscience-informed trauma coaching for trafficked women. We asked a simple, audacious question. Can trauma be resolved safely and rapidly without requiring the survivors to retell the story? We used a protocol built around nervous system regulation, teaching the people how to regulate their nervous system, visual spatial tasking of the short-term working memory, memory reconsolidation, absolutely minimal disclosure by the participants, stabilizing their autonomic nervous system, keeping client agency and dignity. And here's what happened. 14 women began the pilot. 11 completed the full protocol. Why 3 withdrew is their stories. Of the 11 who completed, the outcomes were extraordinary. We had an 86.6% reduction in PTSD symptoms. 10 out of the 11 participants dropped below the diagnostic threshold for PTSD. Several reached a PSSI 5 score, the trauma score, of 0, meaning no intrusive symptoms. Major improvements include the ability to fall and stay asleep, the ability to regulate their emotions, the ability to be non-triggerable, and the ability to access a future image for themselves. There was a 44% reduction in past negative connections. There was a 20% increase in future orientation. And this was all achieved without them retelling their trauma story. These are not small improvements. These are life-changing outcomes. For a population that traditional therapy often struggles to help, these results are unprecedented. One participant began with a score above 70 out of a potential 80. This is a severe life-impacting trauma. And after the protocol, her score was beneath the minimal diagnostic threshold of 10. She actually had a 95% reduction. Another participant did not improve. A reminder that no method works for everybody. But the existence of a non-responder actually strengthens the data set. Because when 10 out of 11 women show dramatic change, we are not looking at chance. We're looking at a pattern, a repeatable, scalable pattern. What does this mean for human trafficking? If human trafficking is dramatically underestimated, then the trauma burden is dramatically underestimated. And the agencies are dramatically under-resourced, and communities are dramatically unprepared, and our medical health system is dramatically inadequate for the scale of need. But here's the good news. We now have evidence that a new neuroscience-informed model can help safely, rapidly, and potentially at scale. This is so encouraging. What was used is not therapy. It is not exposure, and it is not reprocessing through reliving. What was used is a coaching protocol grounded in neuroscience, designed specifically for people whose nervous system cannot handle traditional trauma therapy. So what does this mean? Survivor-led organizations can be equipped with better tools. They already mentor and coach. These tools can be taught to them. Tools that don't re-traumatize, tools that fit real-world environments, tools that produce measurable outcomes. Agencies can get money from governments to use interventions that actually reduce long-term costs. Because healed people are employable people. Healed people require less healthcare costs. Healed people are less likely to rely on crisis services. And healed people get back to their families and community, creating stronger families and communities. And communities can finally see a path beyond the Band-Aid solutions we have in place now. We do not need decades-long models of trauma recovery. We need effective models of trauma recovery. The Inspyrd Angels pilot study and all the other research around visual spatial tasking, and this is the first time in Canada, proves that models exist to do just that. So if trafficking is underestimated, then the courage of the survivors is grossly underestimated. These are powerful human beings to have survived. The burden on agencies is underestimated, and the potential for healing is underestimated. We can change all three. To survivors, you're not broken. You're injured, and injuries heal. And to support agencies, you deserve tools that match the reality you face every day. And those tools are available. And then to policymakers, and to donors and partners, this pilot is not the end. It's just the beginning. It's proof of possibility based on research-proven neuroscience. And it's a doorway into a scalable, measurable, neuroscience-based trauma recovery. And to every Canadian who still believes trafficking is someone else's problem, it isn't. It's here, it's now, it's growing, and so is our capacity to respond. Please, 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 human trafficking may be underestimated, but the strength of the survivors is not. The damage may be enormous, but so is the potential for healing. And today, for the first time, we have data, hard data, backed by other research data that shows a new path forward. Not theoretical, not abstract, not clinical jargon. Real survivors, real tools, real outcomes, real hope. This is the work ahead. And we're just getting started. We're just getting started, but we need your help. So I'd really, really, really encourage you to click the link below. Maybe you want to join our focus group for our trauma app that's coming out. Maybe you'd like to download our free ebook called Inspired Healing, the journey from tragedy to triumph. And maybe you'd like to just stay in touch. Whatever, please click the link, join our community. And thank you very much. We'll take some questions. Now, I can't see my questions. No questions today. That's perfect. I'll see you next Wednesday. Cheers.